I built my dad's company to $500 million. He thought I'd just walk away. Now he pays me to survive. That's not a headline. That's my life. And the truth is, I never set out to outplay him. I only wanted to earn my seat at the table I helped build. Instead, I was given a door and a lesson, one that would take me years and one brutal confrontation to repay in full. My name is Ashley Graham. I'm 34. I live in Denver, Colorado, and for nearly a decade, I worked in one of the fastest growing niches in hospitality tech, helping independent hotels compete with global chains by optimizing their back-end systems, room pricing, staffing, real-time availability, customer flow. Our software made it seamless. The company I worked for wasn't just any startup. It was Graham Hospitality Systems, my family's company. My father, Richard Graham, started it when I was in high school in a converted garage with one engineer and a Rolodex of clients from his hotel management days. I remember watching him take calls late at night in the kitchen, scribbling notes on napkins, pacing around the house in sweatpants and a Bluetooth headset. It wasn't glamorous. It was grit. By the time I graduated from Stanford with my MBA, the company was doing steady B2B business in a dozen cities, but still hadn't scaled. I came home not because I had nowhere else to go. I had offers, but because I believed in what he was building. I thought we could make something great together. And at first, we did. I restructured our pricing model, built out a product roadmap, brought in our first serious round of venture funding, and closed a deal with a boutique hotel chain that put us on the industry map. From there, we exploded. Revenue doubled, then tripled. Our platform became a must-have for independent hotels trying to survive in a world ruled by conglomerates. Within 5 years, we went from 30 people in a midtown loft to over 250 employees in 3 offices. By the time I was 29, we were valued at just over $500 million, and I was the chief strategy officer. But somewhere in that climb, something shifted. My father, once proud to introduce me as his right hand, grew different, closed off, edgy. Whenever I got press, he made jokes. When clients praised my strategy, he changed the subject. He started questioning my decisions in front of junior staff, revising my presentations before they hit the board, and dismissing anything I said as too academic, too modern, too risky. I chalked it up to stress or ego. I didn't want to believe that the man who raised me, who once said, "You'll take this further than I ever could," was beginning to see me as a threat. But then he hired Craig Sutton. Craig was a relic from my father's past, a former operations officer from his early hotel days. No background in tech, no understanding of SaaS, but plenty of military discipline and an old-school charm that masked his insecurity. Within 6 months, Craig had wormed his way into board calls, investor updates, and even product strategy meetings. Despite not knowing what a feature backlog was, I raised concerns privately. Dad dismissed them. "You focus on the big picture," he said. "Let Craig handle the people." Except Craig wasn't handling people. He was handling me. Then came the board meeting. I still remember the air in that room. Crisp, silent, expectant. I had just presented a phased expansion into Canada and Western Europe, data-backed. Capital light, with strategic partnerships already in progress. It was the kind of forward motion we needed, the kind we built our reputation on. When I finished, there was a brief silence. Then my father stood. "Thank you, Ashley," he said, voice calm. "Before we adjourn, I'd like to announce a leadership realignment." I blinked. He continued, "Effective today, Ashley will be stepping down from her role as CSO. We're grateful for her contributions, but we believe it's time to bring in fresh perspective for the next phase of growth. No warning, no conversation, just a public execution." I looked around the room. waiting for anyone to object. No one moved, not even the board member I had mentored for 2 years. 20 minutes later, I was locked out of my work email. Security handed me a cardboard box. HR sent a pre-written statement, and just like that, I was gone. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat in silence. Phone off, blinds closed. I had been erased by the man I spent 10 years trying to help. Erased from the company, from the story, from the future. I told no one. Not yet. But I started writing. Not a resignation letter. Not a diary entry. A strategy. Quiet, clean, methodical. Because if there's one thing my father taught me, it's this in business. Power doesn't always come from the title on your door. Sometimes it comes from the peace no one sees coming. The days after I was removed from the company didn't feel loud. They felt muted, like someone had turned the volume down on my entire life. I didn't speak to the press. I didn't post anything online. I didn't try to explain or defend myself. I disappeared, partly out of shock, partly because I was watching how Craig stepped into his new role, watching how my father fed the media a carefully worded narrative about succession planning, watching how people I'd once mentored avoided eye contact at industry mixers. Their silence didn't hurt me. It only confirmed one thing. I hadn't just been erased by my father. I had been erased by the entire ecosystem I thought would protect me if I did everything right. 3 weeks after the board meeting, I reached out to the one person I still trusted, Elena Cho. She was our first head of product and someone who left before the culture turned. Now she worked independently, consulting for early-stage startups. We met at a tiny cafe in Boulder. I told her everything, not dramatically, just the facts. When I finished, she stirred her coffee and said, "If they're dumb enough to cut out the only person who understands the market, they'll eventually pay for it. But that doesn't mean you have to play dirty." I nodded. She got it. I didn't want revenge. I wanted to build again, this time without asking for permission for the next 3 months. I worked in silence. I started outlining a system that wasn't a reaction to what Graham Hospitality was doing, but a reimagination of what hotel tech could be. I called it Horizon. It wasn't just booking software. It was an adaptive operating system, real-time pricing suggestions, AI-based labor planning, multi-location integration, and third-party OTA sync, all built for hotels that didn't have the budget or staff of the big guys. At first, it was just a whiteboard full of notes, but I still had my memory. I still had my experience. And more importantly, I still had people who believed in me even if they didn't say it out loud. I started reaching out quietly, former teammates, engineers, product managers, investors who used to text me after board calls saying, "You're the only reason I still believe in this company." Not all of them responded. Not all of them could help, but a few did. One back-end engineer I'd mentored quit his job and started prototyping with me. One of our oldest clients in Austin offered to pilot Horizon for free. And one angel investor wired a seed check with one note, build what they couldn't understand. During the day, I met with potential partners. At night, I wrote product docs and reviewed code. I worked from a shared workspace in downtown Denver with 3 strangers and no window. No one there knew who I was. No one cared. And for the first time in a long time, that felt freeing. I wasn't Richard Graham's daughter. I was just Ashley, a woman trying to build something that mattered. 6 months later, Horizon launched its beta at a low-key hospitality tech conference in Chicago. No booth banners, no branded swag, just a single monitor, a clean demo, and a quiet tagline, real-time tools for real-world hotels. Most people walked past without noticing, but a few didn't. One product director from Avalon Hotels stayed for 15 minutes. He asked sharp questions, took notes, and left his card. Send me a deck. He said, let's talk next week. That night. I sat on my motel bed with my laptop, looking at the raw prototype our small team had spent hundreds of hours stitching together, line by line, forecast by forecast. Horizon wasn't built out of revenge. It wasn't designed to outshine anyone. It was born out of necessity, out of being forced to ask myself, what would I create if no one else had control? I didn't know it then. But that meeting with Avalon would change everything. That one quiet connection would lead to our first paying contract. Within a year, Horizon would cover 12% of the independent hotel segment in the Western U.S., but none of that had happened yet. All I knew in that moment was this: I was back, not with noise, not with headlines, but with something that worked, something people could use, something that didn't need a name to carry it. This time, I wasn't entering a room hoping someone would see my value. I was building something so solid, they'd have no choice but to feel the impact whether they gave credit or not. The demo with Avalon led to a full pilot. What started as one hotel location in Santa Fe turned into 3 by the end of the quarter. We customized the interface, added a direct integration for their third-party booking engine, and built a reporting dashboard based on their exact needs. They didn't ask for vanity features. They asked for function. That was the beauty of working with operators instead of executives. They just wanted something that worked better than what they had. And Horizon did, by month 4. Avalon signed a 1-year contract shortly after. 2 more regional hotel groups reached out. Word had gotten around, not because of PR or advertising, but because of performance. One of our early users posted a screenshot on LinkedIn showing how Horizon helped them predict a 20% drop in off-season demand and adjust staffing accordingly. That post got 300 views in 2 days. A quiet wave started, not loud, not flashy, but steady. I didn't chase scale. I chased precision. We built only what we could support. We grew only at the pace we could maintain. And I kept my name out of it, not because I was hiding, because I wanted Horizon to speak for itself. Meanwhile, I started hearing whispers about Graham Hospitality through back channels, former employees, and the occasional slip from a vendor contact. I learned things weren't going as smoothly as they wanted the world to believe. The new roadmap Craig had introduced my father's strategic next phase had been delayed twice. A bug in the latest update caused a handful of smaller clients to experience overbooking errors. Support tickets were going unanswered. Key engineers I had trained were either reassigned, overworked, or gone entirely, most telling of all. 2 of the clients I had brought into the company, the ones who used to text me directly, reached out for coffee. We're just evaluating options. One said carefully, nothing urgent. Of course, I didn't celebrate. I didn't trash talk. But I couldn't deny the quiet satisfaction of knowing what I had built wasn't as easily replaced as they'd assumed. Competence doesn't disappear just because someone erases your name. Real value leaves fingerprints, and mine were everywhere at the 1-year mark. Horizon passed a milestone I hadn't expected so soon. We broke even, not thanks to funding, but through revenue, real clients, real contracts, real monthly usage. I remember sitting in the tiny office we still rented on the east side of Denver, looking at the P&L statement with my lead engineer. He laughed when I asked him to double-check the numbers. "Ashley," he said, "you did it without them." I smiled. But part of me knew it wasn't just about doing it without them. It was about doing it without becoming them. We kept going. We expanded quietly into Arizona, then Oregon. We rebuilt our analytics engine using live feedback from frontline hotel staff, and we added a self-guided onboarding system that let smaller clients go live within 48 hours. No long contracts, no pushy sales calls, just results. Then something strange happened. One of our feature requests came in from a familiar domain, a hotel group I had worked with during my time at Graham Hospitality, one that had once told me directly, "If Richard leaves, we leave." I looked twice. The request was real. They had heard about Horizon. They wanted a meeting. I called Elena. We met at the same cafe in Boulder. I told her what happened. "You're crossing into dangerous territory." She said, "This isn't just the market noticing you anymore. This is the past noticing you." She wasn't wrong, but I didn't feel like I was playing offense. I hadn't sent a single email to Graham's old clients. I hadn't called in any favors. I hadn't even mentioned my last name in public since the day I left. All I'd done was deliver. And that's when I realized something. Legacy doesn't just come from your name. It comes from what happens after people stop saying it, what stays, what works, what's remembered when the title is stripped away. Horizon didn't carry my last name, but it carried my DNA, back at Graham Hospitality. Things were unraveling in small but visible ways. A mid-level manager leaked to a blog that the leadership team was divided over product direction. An internal memo about missed targets made its way to a reporter. And then came the layoff. 30 people. Quietly pushed out, framed as a restructure. But everyone in the industry knew what it meant. I didn't react. I didn't post. I didn't smile. But I felt it that moment when the tide turns. Not because you forced it, but because you waited, prepared, and focused while others were too busy pretending to win. It wasn't revenge. It was resilience. And it was working. It was around Horizon's 18th month that I noticed the shift, not in revenue, though that was steady, not in operations, though our rollout process was getting smoother by the week. It was in the way people started looking at me during conferences, for the first time since I'd left Graham Hospitality. People in the industry weren't avoiding eye contact. They were initiating it. One operations director from a mid-tier hotel group said, "I've heard about your system. It's leaner than the others." That was all. No mention of where I'd come from. No awkward questions about my last name. Just acknowledgement. That meant more to me than any headline ever could. Still, I avoided the spotlight. I turned down speaking panels. I skipped interviews. Not because I was afraid, but because Horizon wasn't ready for noise. Growth. Yes. Momentum. Yes. But noise. That was a different game. And I'd seen what happened when people confused attention for traction. Besides, I had something more important brewing. One of our engineers had quietly been developing a predictive forecasting model for seasonal volatility using live booking data, weather shifts, and regional event tracking. The prototype was rough, but the results were wild, better than anything on the market, and faster too. I knew immediately what it meant if we got this right. We'd leap ahead of even the most well-funded competitors, not just because of technology, but because we listened to what real hotel operators needed: simplicity, accuracy, and control. We began testing it across 5 pilot locations. Around the same time, I received a message from a name I hadn't seen in 2 years, Nicole McPherson, VP of Strategy at Graham Hospitality, one of the few people who had stayed quiet during my exit. Her message was brief. "Would love to catch up. Coffee next week." I stared at the screen. It could have been nothing, or it could have been the beginning of something bigger. I replied with one word. Sure. We met at a neutral cafe, downtown, off the main strip. She looked the same, polished, composed, efficient, but her tone had changed, less guarded, more real. After the small talk, she leaned in slightly. I've seen Horizon's traction. People are noticing. She paused. Craig's not handling it well. I didn't reply. She went on. There's tension inside. Sales isn't hitting targets. Products missed 3 deadlines. Some of your old clients are requesting features we can't deliver without rebuilding core infrastructure. She sipped her coffee. We never understood how much of that system was you. I wanted to feel vindicated. I wanted to lean back and say, I told you so, but I didn't. I just asked, why are you telling me this now? Nicole looked me in the eye. Because this industry doesn't forgive mistakes. And right now, you're the one building something that works. Then she hesitated. Off the record. The board is asking more questions than usual. Richard's not answering them. That evening, I sat alone and thought about how fast tides turn. 1 year ago, I was being walked out of the very company she now admitted couldn't function without what I'd built. It wasn't just about tech. It was culture, process, discipline. I hadn't just been a strategist. I had been the architecture, and no one noticed until I left, 3 weeks later. Graham Hospitality lost one of their longest-standing clients, not to Horizon, but the reason they left, according to what a contact quietly passed on, was product instability and lack of clear leadership. The irony wasn't lost on me. They removed me in the name of vision, and now they were struggling to see it all. Meanwhile, our forecasting tool rolled out publicly. We didn't announce it with banners or flashy demos. We sent a single email to our active client base with one line. Your next season just got smarter. The adoption rate tripled in a month. Support tickets dropped by 40%. More importantly, retention hit an all-time high. Clients weren't just trying Horizon. They were staying. I could feel the pressure starting to build not on me, but on Graham Hospitality. We hadn't crossed paths directly yet. No legal disputes. No public shots fired. But we were now occupying the same space, and people were beginning to compare. One tech columnist, in a passing remark, wrote, "It's unclear how Graham plans to compete long-term when smaller. More adaptive platforms like Horizon are gaining serious ground." I read that line 3 times. I had never said a word publicly about my history. I never mentioned my father, never gave interviews. But somehow, the truth had begun to surface anyway, not through scandal, but through contrast. I wasn't chasing them. I was outpacing them, and everyone was starting to notice. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like gravity. When you build something that actually works, the world shifts toward it slowly, but inevitably. The first time Horizon appeared on Graham Hospitality's competitor analysis slide deck, I heard about it through someone on the inside. A former sales lead who had once worked under me sent a screenshot with no comment, just the logo, circled in red, beneath a bullet point that read, "Emerging threat, pricing flexibility, faster product iteration." It was surreal. My name wasn't mentioned, but I knew exactly what it meant. We weren't just playing the same game now. We were changing the rules. At the same time, our data showed something unexpected. A small but growing segment of our inbound leads were coming from former Graham clients. Not just the ones I had worked with personally, those made sense, but others I had never touched. It was clear word had spread, not just about Horizon software, but about the stability we offered. In a space where vendor trust was everything, our consistency had become our edge. I didn't weaponize it. I didn't need to. All I had to do was hold the line and keep building. Meanwhile, Graham Hospitality's leadership cracks were no longer rumors. Their chief product officer resigned without a successor. A major integration project failed to go live on time. Their sales team began offering aggressive discounts to retain accounts that weren't even up for renewal. It wasn't sabotage, it was math. When you prioritize control over competence, the numbers always catch up. Then something happened that changed the trajectory again. One of Horizon's early investors called and said a regional holding company was interested in acquiring minority stake. They managed a portfolio of tech-driven hotel chains and were looking for proprietary tools. I listened carefully. They didn't want to buy us out. They wanted to partner. Equity in exchange for guaranteed rollout across all properties. It wasn't just a funding opportunity. It was reach. After weeks of negotiation, we closed the deal. The terms were clean. I retained operational control. The cash infusion gave us a 2-year runway, and within 90 days, Horizon would be deployed across 74 hotel locations. That move alone pushed us into a new category. We weren't a scrappy upstart anymore. We were infrastructure. The morning the contract was signed, I walked past the old Graham building. I hadn't planned to. I was heading to a client breakfast across the street, but I paused for a second and looked at the glass tower that had once felt like everything. Same logo, same revolving doors, but something about it felt smaller now. Not physically, symbolically, like the weight it once had over me no longer existed. Back in the office, my head of operations pulled me into a call. One of Graham Hospitality's clients, a chain of boutique properties in the Southwest, was asking about a custom Horizon deployment. They weren't just comparing, they were ready to migrate. The irony. This was a client my father had personally closed 6 years ago, a contract he used to brag about during board meetings that night. I sat in my kitchen alone, reviewing the project scope they'd requested. It wasn't revenge, it was validation. But it also brought a question I couldn't ignore. At what point do you stop avoiding the past and start engaging it directly? The answer came a week later. We got wind that Graham was trying to pivot finally into predictive analytics. They'd pitched a prototype to their board. Problem was, it didn't work. The tech wasn't ready, and their team didn't have the bandwidth to fix it. Someone on their executive team quietly reached out to one of our engineers, offering a consulting fee just to explore ideas. That same engineer came straight to me. I didn't get angry. I didn't retaliate. I simply wrote an internal policy banning back-channel outreach from competing firms. Professional, clear, enforceable, but it sent a message. Horizon wasn't fragile, and I wasn't naive anymore. Weeks passed. Our rollout across the holding company's properties exceeded expectations. We hit a major growth benchmark that triggered a press piece in one of the top hotel industry publications. It didn't mention me by name, but it did mention Horizon's origin story, started by a former executive at a legacy firm who chose to build something better, not louder. I smiled when I read that. The next day, my father called me for the first time in 2 years. He didn't leave a voicemail, just a missed call. I didn't return it, not out of spite, but because I already knew why he was calling. Horizon had just replaced another of his key clients. This time, one of the originals. The foundation was starting to crack, and he had finally realized the architect he pushed out might be the only one who knew how it had been built. It was happening, quietly, precisely, and without compromise. The missed call from my father sat in my phone like a stone. No voicemail, no message, just silence, which somehow said everything. 2 years of nothing. And now he was reaching out. I didn't need to ask why. I already knew. Horizon had just replaced another one of his original clients. One of the contracts he used to talk about like it was part of his personal legacy. The only difference now was that this time, the client had made the move publicly. A quiet press release. a mention in a trade newsletter, just enough for people in the industry to connect the dots. I didn't respond, not out of anger, not out of pride. I just didn't see the need, because I wasn't in a fight with him. I was running a company, one that worked. A week later, I got a message from Nicole again. You should know. It began. Things are shifting. Apparently, Graham's board had called an emergency session, not because of Horizon specifically, but because of performance, missed targets, shrinking pipeline, high churn. Their quarterly numbers had dropped below projections 3 quarters in a row, and lenders were starting to ask hard questions. The board's not united, she said, but cracks are showing. They're asking about contingency plans, about external leadership. She didn't say it outright, but I knew what she was implying. They were circling, looking for a solution to a problem they had helped create. 2 days later, one of Horizon's engineers forwarded an internal Graham memo that had leaked through a vendor. The memo laid out a quiet restructuring plan. It included potential layoffs, department consolidations, and most importantly, a line item that read leadership transition strategy, pending board approval. That wasn't rumor. That was roadmap. Still, I didn't gloat. I didn't forward the memo to anyone. I didn't make a sound, because none of this had been my plan. I hadn't spent 2 years building Horizon to make anyone look bad. I built it so I wouldn't need to ask permission ever again. But I knew what was coming. When a company starts to lose faith in its own leadership, it doesn't take long before the questions become decisions. And sure enough, the next call didn't come from Nicole. It came from Noah Keene, a senior board member I hadn't spoken to since my final board meeting the day I was removed. We met in a private room at a restaurant in Cherry Creek. He was calm, measured, said all the right things. We've been watching your progress. You've handled everything with integrity. We may have made some assumptions back then. I let him talk. Then he got to the point. If there were a path back, would you take it? It took me a moment to respond, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I needed to be sure he was asking the right question, a path back to what I asked. He shifted to Graham hospitality in some form, maybe leadership, maybe advisory. The board is open. I shook my head. I'm not looking to return to the thing that pushed me out. I've already built something better. He nodded slowly. That's what we're afraid of. That line stayed with me for days, not because it felt like a threat, but because it sounded like regret. Later that week, I received another message, this time from their head of finance. The company had officially missed a loan covenant. If they didn't restructure or secure bridge financing within 60 days, default was on the table. Horizon wasn't responsible for that, but the timing couldn't have been worse for them, or better. Depending on your perspective, we didn't take advantage of it. We didn't change our pricing. We didn't cut deals with their lenders or partners. But we did receive a surge in inbound leads from smaller hotel chains, some who had tried Graham's newest update and walked away confused. One client said, "It feels like no one's steering the ship over there anymore." I didn't agree or disagree. I just listened. Around that same time, my mother called me out of the blue. I hadn't spoken to her much since the fallout. She stayed neutral through most of it, trying to hold the family together from a distance. But this time, her voice was different, tired, hesitant. "He won't say it," she said softly, "but he knows he was wrong. He watches your product updates. He reads every article." I stayed quiet. "He keeps asking what he should do next. For the first time in my life, I think he honestly doesn't know." She paused. "Maybe you should talk." I didn't answer right away, not because I wasn't willing, but because I needed to be sure the conversation wouldn't just be another attempt at control. I had spent too long building something rooted in clarity to walk back into confusion. But I also knew one thing: the company he once founded, the company I had helped shape, was on the edge, and the person he once pushed away might be the only one who could stop it from collapsing entirely. It was almost midnight when the doorbell rang, and I knew before I even checked the window who it was. My father stood there alone. No driver, no assistant, no briefcase, just a man in a wrinkled blazer too formal for the weather, with a look I hadn't seen on him in years, defeated, uncertain. I opened the door without a word and stepped aside to let him in. He paused for a second, eyes scanning the hallway like he was trying to place himself in a life he had never made room for. We walked silently into my home office, where the only light came from my laptop still open on the desk, its screen glowing with the quiet rhythm of late-night work. He sat down heavily, not with the confidence of a man used to giving orders, but with the weight of someone who had finally run out of them. I sat across from him, waited, and watched as he hesitated, then said in a voice that was lower than I remembered, "The company's in trouble." I stayed quiet. He glanced at the floor like it held the script he didn't want to read aloud. We missed another loan covenant, the bank's calling it in. If we don't restructure within 30 days, we're going to lose everything. It wasn't dramatic. It was mathematical. He wasn't looking for pity. He was looking for help. So I asked, "Do you think I can fix it?" He didn't even pause. "I know you can," for a long time. Neither of us said anything else. I studied the man across from me and tried to remember the last time I saw him like this, not furious, not defensive, just quiet. No headlines, no bravado, no mask, just a founder at the edge of collapse. He spoke again. "I thought pushing you out would protect what I built. But what I built stopped working the moment you left. You weren't just a piece of the machine. You were the one keeping it together." I didn't flinch. I didn't offer him a way to save face. I just told him the truth. "I'm not interested in coming back under your name or under your shadow. If you want a real shot at saving the company, it needs to be rebuilt with transparency, with discipline, and without fear." Then I opened the drawer beside me and took out a folder I had prepared months earlier. Not because I was waiting for this moment, but because I had known something like it would eventually come. Inside was a full 90-day restructure plan, complete with cash flow modeling, personnel alignment, and a hybrid integration proposal that would allow Horizon's infrastructure to quietly support Graham Hospitality's back-end operations while the company stabilized. I slid it across the table. "This is what I'm willing to do. I take over as CEO. You move into a non-executive chairman role. You step away from operations completely. The board is restructured with at least 3 independent directors added within 60 days. All decisions go through the new governance model. No exceptions." He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply opened the folder and read, flipping page by page with a slowness that made me wonder if he was actually absorbing it or just trying to keep his hands busy. When he got to the final page, he looked up and asked, "And what happens if the board doesn't agree?" "Then I don't come in. I won't save something that still wants to pretend it doesn't need saving." He nodded. There was no fight left in him, just understanding. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I was wrong about the business, about you, about the way I handled everything." I said nothing because there was nothing left to prove. After a few seconds, he stood up, the folder still in his hand. "I'll bring it to the board tomorrow. If they approve, we'll do it your way." I walked him to the door. He stopped with his hand on the handle and said, "Your mother was right. I should have called you months ago. I just wasn't ready to admit I failed. I looked him in the eye and said, "Maybe this time you didn't fail. Maybe this time you're doing the only thing that can stop everything from falling apart." He nodded once, opened the door, and walked out into the cold night. I didn't watch him go. I just closed the door and stood still in the silence. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry. I felt focused. This wasn't about reclaiming something that had been taken. It was about stepping into the role I had already earned years ago, now with full clarity and full control. The company wasn't mine because someone handed it to me. It was mine because I had already rebuilt what they thought they could replace. And now, if the board said yes, I wouldn't just be saving what was left. I'd be shaping what came next. The board meeting happened on a Thursday morning, inside the same glass conference room where I had once been publicly stripped of my title with no warning, no conversation, and no dignity. But this time, I walked in not as someone hoping to be heard. I walked in with a signed deal memo from our primary investor, a restructuring plan already vetted by two of their largest lenders, and a personal guarantee from the holding company backing Horizon's systems integration. I wore no anger, just precision. The board members were already seated when I entered, folders open, eyes sharper than they'd been 2 years earlier. Some of them wouldn't meet my gaze. Some did. Noah Keene was the first to speak, his tone more formal than I remembered. "We're here to vote on the proposed transition plan presented by Ashley Graham." He paused for a second. "For the record, this is being considered due to material breach of loan covenants, operational instability, and ongoing performance decline." He nodded once in my direction. "You may proceed. I didn't waste time. I walked them through every phase: debt restructuring, product stabilization, team consolidation, vendor retention, and executive realignment. I laid out the exact budget cuts I would implement, the culture rework I would lead, and the system migration that would use Horizon's infrastructure to quietly stabilize their back end in under 60 days. I made no excuses. I named no names. I simply showed them the plan that could save the company. When I finished, I closed the folder and said one sentence: "This is not a temporary solution. It is a complete reset, and if implemented fully, it will work for a moment." No one said anything. Then one of the directors, a man who had once voted to remove me, cleared his throat. "I believe this is the most clarity we've had in over a year." Another nodded. "I support it." One by one, they voted unanimous, 11-0, no abstentions, no delay. My father didn't speak until the end. His voice was steady, but smaller somehow. "The board accepts the transition, effective immediately. Ashley Graham is appointed Chief Executive Officer of Graham Hospitality Systems." There was a quiet shuffling of papers, a nod from legal counsel, and that was it. No champagne, no applause, just a transfer of power that felt less like a return and more like a correction. After the meeting, I didn't linger. I walked through the hallways that used to know me and found them quieter, older. Some of the same employees were still there. Others were gone. The office manager gave me a small smile as I passed. "Welcome back, Ashley." I nodded, but I didn't stop. I had no interest in nostalgia. I had work to do. The first thing I did as CEO was issue a quiet memo. No blame, no chest thumping, just a clear outline of what would happen next. New structure, new expectations, same mission. My second move was to call a meeting with the department leads, not in the boardroom, but in the team space where the real work happened. I asked them one question: what's still working, and what broke after I left? The answers came slowly at first, then more freely. People weren't afraid to be honest anymore. because I wasn't there to punish. I was there to repair. That night, as I sat alone in the office, lights dimmed, the city glowing quietly outside the window, I let myself feel the moment not as a victory, but as a beginning. I wasn't the same person who once begged to be seen. I didn't need their validation. I had already built something that proved I could lead. Now I had the chance to apply it where it had started, not for legacy, but for continuity. As I shut down the computer and walked to the elevator, I passed the wall where the founder's portrait used to hang. It had been taken down during the rebranding. I didn't ask where it went. Some legacies need to be remembered. Others need to be redefined. And some, if you're lucky, get rewritten completely, not with speeches, but with systems that hold up even when no one's watching. That was my plan for Graham. Not to reclaim my seat, but to build one no one could take away again. The first 6 weeks back as CEO moved fast, not with fanfare, but with urgency. I didn't spend time reflecting on what had been lost. I focused on what could still be salvaged. The financials were worse than I expected. Cash reserves were dwindling. Several key vendors were owed back payments, and employee morale had cratered after a year of layoffs. Confusion and short-term pivots that led nowhere. I started with what I knew: clarity. I restructured the product roadmap, scrapped the bloated features that had stalled development, and recentered our entire platform around reliability. The company didn't need reinvention. It needed restoration. I quietly onboarded a small task force of engineers from Horizon, not to replace the current team, but to augment them. I didn't parade it around. I just made sure they worked alongside the people who still believed in this company enough to stay. We didn't need heroes. We needed systems. Within 3 weeks, support ticket backlog dropped by half. Our core product stabilized. Uptime improved. And for the first time in months, clients began renewing without needing incentives. On the people side, I sat down with every department head, one by one. No agenda, no judgment, just one question: what was holding you back? Some hesitated, others spoke plainly. Most of the stories were the same. They weren't afraid of the work. They were afraid of being ignored. So I listened, and when I made changes, I pointed directly to their input, not as a gesture, but as a blueprint. Culture doesn't rebuild with slogans. It rebuilds with proof. Meanwhile, I met with our lenders personally. I laid out our plan, showed them what we'd already fixed, and asked for 120 days to complete the full restructure. They gave us 90. It was enough. In the background, my father kept his distance. He still held the title of chairman, but his role was now purely symbolic. We passed in the hallways occasionally. He didn't interrupt. He didn't interfere. He just watched, sometimes from the edge of meetings, sometimes from behind a half-closed door. At first, I wondered if he was waiting for me to fail. But over time, I realized it was something else. He was watching something he had built survive without him. And maybe, for the first time, understanding that survival didn't mean erasure, it meant adaptation. The turning point came during our first quarterly earnings review. We didn't post record profits, but we were profitable. Margins had recovered. Burn rate was under control. Our client churn had slowed to the lowest point in 2 years. The board didn't offer applause, but no one questioned the direction. They didn't need to. The numbers spoke that night. I stayed late at the office, walking the floors alone. Some of the spaces still felt haunted by what had happened, by the silence, the sudden departures, the trust that had been slowly eroded by decisions made in closed rooms. I didn't want to wipe that history clean. I wanted to layer something new on top of it, not to forget, but to outgrow it. On my desk sat a photo from the early days, me, my father, and two of the original engineers, smiling after our first major deal. I didn't feel angry when I saw it. I felt grounded. Everything we had built, everything we had broken, and everything I had now rebuilt was real. And it mattered because people's lives were tied to it, their paychecks, their hours, their belief in something bigger than survival. The next morning, I announced a quiet but important shift. Horizon and Graham would now operate as a single entity under one system, not a merger, a unification. I didn't use language like acquisition. I didn't mention who saved who. I just said, this is how we move forward together. It was the right decision, operationally. It gave us leverage, strategically. It gave us speed. But symbolically, it meant something else. It meant that I no longer needed to prove I was right. I just had to keep proving we could lead that week. An industry article ran a headline that made me stop and reread it twice. The quiet return of Ashley Graham, how clarity, consistency, and control rebuilt a company in decline. I didn't repost it. I didn't need to. But I saved the article anyway, not because it praised me, because it captured something deeper. This wasn't a comeback. This was a continuation of something I had never stopped doing, even when no one saw it building, leading, repairing, one system, one conversation, one decision at a time, and for anyone watching from the outside who had ever been dismissed, sidelined, or erased, I wanted them to know. You don't always have to fight to be heard. Sometimes you just have to outlast the noise and keep doing the work. The anniversary celebration was held at the very hotel where my father and I had once pitched our first major enterprise deal, back when I still believed loyalty alone could keep a company standing. Now, almost a decade later, the ballroom looked nearly the same: polished wood floors, silver chairs arranged in perfect symmetry, centerpieces that tried a little too hard, but the tone was different. This wasn't about bravado or inflated numbers. It was a recalibration, a room full of partners, clients, and employees who had seen the fall, the rebuild, and the slow, deliberate rise that followed. I stood backstage reviewing the speech I had written, but wasn't sure I would deliver. I never liked the spotlight. I didn't need applause. But I knew that moments like this weren't about ego. They were about memory, and in this case, about rewriting the final chapter of a story that had once been ripped out of my hands. My father arrived late, slipping into the room without ceremony. He stood near the back, not hidden, but not seeking attention either. I hadn't seen him speak in front of a crowd since the day he announced my removal. Tonight, he wasn't speaking. I was when they introduced me as CEO. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was steady, solid, earned. I stepped up to the podium and didn't start with numbers. I started with truth. I said this company had been through almost every kind of storm a business could face. Economic shifts, internal politics, failed rollouts, broken trust. I didn't name names. I didn't tell them who caused what. I told them what held, the people who stayed, the clients who gave us second chances, the systems that didn't crash, and the belief that quiet leadership is still leadership. Then I told them something else, that rebuilding isn't about returning to what was lost. It's about building something so stable, so functional, that no single ego or title can destroy it again. And then I paused, looked at the room, and said what I had never said publicly until that moment. I didn't come back to be proven right. I came back because I wasn't done building. After the speech, people came up to shake hands, offer small congratulations, or share personal stories. Some I remembered, some I didn't, but they all seemed to know the arc. They had seen the gap between who I was and who I had become, and it reminded them of their own gaps, their own unfinished arcs. I slipped out early, as I always do, avoiding the photos, the interviews, the follow-ups. I walked through the back hallway to the parking garage where the city felt cooler, quieter. My father was there, leaning against the side of his car, coat folded over one arm, eyes unreadable. We stood in silence for a few seconds before he said, "You didn't have to include me in that speech. I know, but I did. Not because of obligation, but because the truth includes you too." He looked down at the ground like he had something else to say, but instead he just nodded. Then he said, "It's better now than it ever was under me. And I don't mean the numbers. I mean the culture, the calm, the trust. It feels like a place that's growing again." I appreciated the words, but I didn't try to comfort him, because this wasn't about comfort. It was about honesty. He asked, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't pushed you out?" I answered without hesitation. "I think about what might not have happened if you hadn't," and I meant it, because without that moment, I wouldn't have started Horizon. I wouldn't have learned what I was truly capable of. I wouldn't have built the resilience that kept this company alive when it was hanging by a thread. We shook hands, not a ceremonial handshake, just two people acknowledging a long road, unevenly traveled. Then I got into my car and drove home. Later that night, as I closed my laptop and turned out the lights, I thought about every person watching this story unfold from a distance. The people who were underestimated, sidelined, or told they weren't ready. The ones who gave everything to something they believed in, only to be erased when it started working. And I realized this story wasn't about revenge. It was about return, not to where you were, but to who you are when no one else is validating it. So if you've ever been pushed out of the room you built, don't waste time yelling at the door. Just go build a better room. And when they knock someday, you'll be ready with silence, with systems, and with something that works whether they believe in you or not. What would you have done if someone erased your name from what you helped build? And would you have had the patience to let your work answer for you?